Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of BIM After Dark Live. My name is Jeff, also known as the Revit Kid, and welcome. This is episode 73 of BIM After Dark Live. If this is your first time here, thanks for joining us. This is a weekly live stream. Like I said, episode 73, so there's a lot more episodes you can check out if you're just tuning in. Head on over to live.bimafterdark.com to see the previous 72 episodes. It's a weekly live stream where we talk about Revit, BIM, and really any adjacent software with either myself or some special guests like I have tonight. Tonight's guest is a returning guest, and I'll introduce him in a minute, but we are going to be talking about some interesting stuff, talking about Python, C#, Dynamo, Grasshopper, Revit, and sort of the connection and the conversation about all of them. And before you tune out and say, my God, that sounds completely intimidating, I can promise you that my guest, Marcello, when I introduce him and he goes through it, you will realize that if there's anyone you want explaining a topic like this that seems completely overwhelming, this is the guy. So stay tuned, and I can't wait to introduce him and jump into it. I do want to remind everyone that this is a live show. So if you're here tonight on March 10th at 9 p.m. Eastern, feel free to chat. I'm going to be checking out the chat the whole time. Talk to each other, talk to me, ask questions. I'll be keeping an eye on it. And then, of course, make sure you subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. That's how you know I'm going live. That's how you know the next episodes. And that's how you know other tutorials, tips, and tricks that I'm posting pretty consistently here on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. And then finally, thank you to Twinmotion, who is our sponsor this season. I'm going to roll a little clip and tell you a little bit about Twinmotion and how you can support them as well as supporting this show. Twinmotion. I'm sure if you guys follow me at all, you probably know what Twinmotion is, but if you don't, it is a real-time rendering engine built on the Unreal rendering engine, and you saw a bunch of little clips right there. Awesome tool. Check out, I'm going to put links down in the description, but check out the channel. I have all kinds of great tutorials. I actually have a free course on Twinmotion, from Revit to Twinmotion. If you just head on over to twinmotionkid.com, or the twinmotionkid.com, I should say. But 2022 is a huge release for Twinmotion. Real-time path tracer, which is an incredible ray tracing engine. They added full-on Quixel Megascan libraries. They have an incredible cloud access to your scenes, which is awesome, and a bunch more features. Definitely check it out. I highlighted them in a video post, which I will post in the description below. If you're interested, please head on over to twinmotion.com/BIMAfterDark. You can have a full working free trial, and then they'll know that you heard it here. I did want to quickly highlight, though, some of the new features every week of 2020, Twinmotion 2022, I should say. And the one I want to highlight this week is sky domes. So this is something that they added recently. And not only do sky domes help with the realism of your scene, as I'm showing here in this video, but they have an entire library of Quixel Megascan sky domes. And so you can see I'm dragging them in and out, and you can see the difference. If you don't know what sky domes are, they're global illumination lighting that affects your entire scene, and it gives it a much more realistic feel. So you'll see what I'm doing here is just flipping in sky domes in and out, and you can see how the entire feeling of your scene changes, the clouds, the color, the global illumination of the scene. I'm just going to go through a couple examples, but also show you the giant library. So sky domes is not a new thing when it comes to rendering engines, but it is a fairly new thing to have a gigantic library of sky dome elements at your disposal without having to go dig around the internet for them. So definitely worth an effort, worth checking out. Again, if you're interested, head on over to twinmotion.com/BIMAfterDark and let them know that you heard about it here. Download the free trial and try it out, and then definitely check out the videos I have all over the blog in the YouTube channel showing you how to use it. So. Oops, I just hit there we go. There was too many sounds playing there. Welcome everybody again. Before we jump in, I just checking out the chat here. Some returners, some returning folks, some new folks. How's it going, everyone? Oh, Argentina. What's up, man? Cool. Mateus from Argentina. Cool. Okay. So without further ado, he's been playing around on Revit in the background, getting ready for us. I think it's about time that we get to show his face. returning guest and friend of the show, Marcello. What's up, man?
Hello.
Welcome back. This is your fourth time maybe?
I believe
I
so.
think being
Is
on
that
the
a
show.
record?
It might be actually you and I think you, Paul, Aubin, and Aaron may be the three that I had to check to see. You may be tied. I don't know. We'll see. But you were actually on the very first episode too, or not the first episode. I should say one of the first live streams before I knew this was going to be sort of a weekly thing. When I had you and Paul come on, and we just kind of did an Ask Us Anything for an hour. So
Oh
I
yeah.
always
I
appreciate you
remember
coming
that.
on. Yeah, it was a good time. That was 2 years ago, believe it or not, almost to the.
Holy smokes, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
I think it was March, and it was right in the beginning of the pandemic, so it was probably 2020, and I think it was sometime in March. So, welcome back. And then
Thank you.
for anyone interested, I will post links to the previous episodes where Marcello came on the show. Again, we had that Ask Me Anything kind of thing, where it was myself, Paul Albin, and Marcello just taking questions, Q&A, and chatting. Then I believe you came on for Grasshopper, I think it was, right? Grasshopper Inside or Rhino
Yes.
Inside with a little
Yes.
grasshopper
Early
action.
on, yes.
Then some structure stuff last year towards the winter, and now we're back on to talk about more grasshopper, but with a little bit of a twist. So thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So I guess for those out there who are watching this and watching it in the future who don't know who you are in this little Revit blogosphere we have, maybe give everyone a quick introduction to who Marcello is.
Okay. Hello. I'm Marcello. I have been working in the industry, AEC industry, for 23 years now, at a firm called John Martin and Associates. We're a structural firm. And I am their director of advanced technology, although that's a small part of what I do. I also do a lot of presentations in the industry. I like to look at the new technology in the industry and find out what's exciting and teach the world about it. So you'll see me, well, hopefully as things start to open up, you'll see me at different conferences, Outreach University. I've got a class coming up here at Built.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always trying to tackle something exciting and new. And so that's one of the things we're going to talk about
Yeah.
today. Uh,
Yes. Super
yeah,
excited.
it's super. Yeah, it is very exciting. In fact, Jeff, you told me, hey, do you want to come back on the show? And what are you going to talk about? I said, oh, I've got this great topic I want to talk about that I've been exploring recently.
Yeah, it's
And
awesome. I mean, usually the way I try and sort of book guests and stuff is that there's twofold. It's either sometimes I'll have a topic in mind, or someone will suggest a topic, and I'll try and find someone that's sort of around that, or someone will suggest a guest, and then I'll chat with you. And for you, it's always sort of like, what are you excited about right now, Marcelo? Because there's always something you're tweaking with and messing around, and so that's kind of, I give you a few months in between, and then I'll reach out and be like, what are you doing now?
that's
So
right. I need a few months to
yeah,
wrap my head around what I'm working on it.
yeah, yeah.
And this particular topic is coming around full circle. And
Awesome.
so everyone's probably everyone's seen the title. It's a it's Python and C sharp within Dynamo and Grasshopper.
Awesome.
Just so when I was last on the show, we did go over the book that I did publish called
Mm-hmm.
The Dynamo and Grasshopper for Revit Cheat Sheet Reference Manual.
Mm-hmm.
So you can put a link to that.
Yep, I'll
If
definitely
you'd
put a
like.
link to that
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
previous show where we went through the pages and everything too, for sure.
that's right. Yeah,
Yep.
in great detail. It's just these one-page summaries of how to do things in Dynamo and in Grasshopper related to Revit. And now I'm actually doing a second version, a part two, if you will, a version two, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm accepting a lot of feedback from the readers and the
Mm-hmm.
industry. And one thing the book had was a chapter on how to customize Dynamo and Grasshopper, but it only focused on C sharp. And a lot of people were like, well, where's the Python? And so I spent the last almost year wrapping my head around Python, because it wasn't anything that I really learned. And I just kind of kept pushing it off and pushing it off. And I finally said, you know what, I better wrap my head around Python.
Yeah.
And I saw it from a C sharp lens. And now I'm at a point where I'm going to be updating the book in the version 2 that is now going to have an equivalent Python section.
Mm-hmm.
And so today is kind of a rough draft of this
Got
conversation and topics coming about how to do that.
Awesome. So So I guess where I kind of wanted to start, and definitely as the version 2 comes out, and you want to, we'll put some links to the information. We can even put in the description here, even if the links grow over time to something different. So if anyone's looking at this, 3 weeks from now or 2 months from now when it's gone, I'll just put the links in there. So definitely check out the description below. But I guess where I wanted to start was, I think we're gonna have different people watching this, right? There's going to be people who maybe are Python users, maybe they're C# users, maybe there's people who don't know either one. And I kind of fall in that because I've only really dabbled in, honestly, Python. I've only ever messed with other people's script. And so I've gotten that, and I've only learned C# to the point where I attempted making an add-in or two, 6 years ago in Revit.
Okay.
and that's about it. And so I've never had to, and then if I really need something, I'll reach out to people I know to write a custom node or something like that, because, why not? But and then I think there's going to be C# people. So I think we're going to have a wide variety. So I guess maybe to set up the context and the lens for everyone, what, I guess, who should be listening, and then I guess
it's a good question. It's a good question.
Yeah,
it's a good question because the thing is, the topic actually covers quite a bit, and you're like, well, where do I fall? I could probably tell you who it wouldn't include. Okay. If you are an expert Dynamo, and you're an expert Grasshopper user, and you know how to use Python in Grasshopper and Dynamo, and you know how to use C# in Python and Grasshopper, I'd say this class is I'm sorry, I called it class. Sorry,
it's all good.
This discussion is probably not for you. It's for anyone else who doesn't fall in that specific category. So,
awesome.
So you can think of every permutation that might be. You don't know Dynamo, you don't know Grasshopper.
Right.
You know Dynamo, you don't know Grasshopper out of the box. You know Dynamo.
Right.
I couldn't go over every permutation.
Yeah, I got it. So any combination,
it's a mathematical
of folks,
factorial, right?
But which I think
the
people
here could figure out all the possibilities. But everything else you could do that. And I was one of those people, because I knew Grasshopper, I knew Dynamo, I knew C# in both of them, but I didn't know Python. And so it was really eye-opening to me as I went on my journey about a year ago, learning the differences, the nuances, the plus and the minuses. And I think that's probably what our discussion will be today, is kind of like, what are the pros and cons of each of those permutations? Because that's what people really, really want to know. And ultimately, it's up to the user to make the decision on what they want to use. And quite honestly, I use all four. Actually, there's six technically. There's, like, if you want to do something in Revit, say you want to get a category, you could either use Dynamo out of the box, you can use Grasshopper out of the box, you can use Dynamo Python, you can use Dynamo C#, you can use Grasshopper C#, you can use Grasshopper Python. So there's kind of six options you have. And really, today I'm hoping we can have a little discussion on the pros and cons to get people more informed on which way to go. Because I mean, in an hour, there's no way we're going to cover all six in intricate detail. Although I do have one-page summaries that I think will help. I don't think we can code from scratch here in an hour, but I do have one-page summaries that might be able to help.
So I think before we jump in, one of the things I did want to mention is to those folks out there who maybe don't know any of them. So maybe you're even beginning at Dynamo, maybe you never even touched Dynamo. I think, if anything, don't get discouraged, and just realize that this is sort of showing you a reason and a pathway forward, as well as giving you ideas of what you could possibly do with it, I think is the key. I mean, I'll give a perfect example today. So I've obviously learned, pretty well versed at Dynamo, never really used Grasshopper or Rhino. And then Python, like I said, I only edited scripts really, and, you mismatch things together to make them work. Got the concepts, but I can't write Python. If I would never take a test saying I could write Python. But the whole Rhino connection with Grasshopper and so on, I actually received a model from a design team recently. And this is, I'm only setting this up because I think for people who maybe don't even realize where the value could exist in this, I just want to give a real quick, real other example that literally happened about 6 hours ago. We received a Rhino model that, I won't go down the road of should this really have been in Rhino. It was really just a bunch of blocks, but whatever. Well, it's fine. But it was a massing program diagram, right? And it was a 3DM file, and we're doing a takeoff for it. We're the CM, so we're doing estimates for it. And, we're trying to figure out what is the most efficient way to take off those areas, because all we really needed was the floor plates. We didn't need all the blocks. We didn't need all this. And so there's all these pathways of, well, how do we convert this to something where we don't have to sit there and redraw these boundaries, right, to get an area? And so there was two methods. There was either, I go inside Rhino and click the surface and pull an area out, or I use Rhino.Inside and convert those faces to floors, and then I've got a Revit model, and that's literally the pathway we took. So there's a perfect example of, like, you're not a Rhino user, but hey, there's the way you can bring this information and use it in Revit. So I just wanted to give that as a context, because for people who may be feeling overwhelmed or just not see it, I think you got to look at episodes like this as tool, idea, something to keep in the back of your mind. If you're not going to use it today, even 2 months from now, we're like, I remember that time when Marcello was talking about this and that, and I need to write that. And so keep that in mind while we go through this. I think that's important for anything that seems far beyond what you need to know, or your knowledge base, or what you're doing, is still good to be exposed to it, is kind of what I'm getting at. So that was my little monologue. And it was also interesting because, it's interesting too, because I just had Hassan on, right, a couple episodes ago, and then you were on a while ago talking about Rhino.Inside, and I kept saying to myself, where can I use this? Like, when am I going to use this? And it was like, it's like, here we go. I can use it. It's either I learn it all in Rhino, or I can use these tools to pull it to a program where the rest of the team can use. So keep that in mind, guys, as we go through this. Think about it as opportunities, tools, and exposure to what will probably be common language for all of us in a few years.
Yeah. You bring up some good points. It's been my mission in life to not make things complicated, to make things simple.
Mm-hmm.
The technology we want to use and adapt in the AEC industry. My mission in life was to make it simple, so it's not intimidating and it's very inviting. And so a lot of things I would show would be very simple examples, but
mm-hmm.
enough to say, hey, to have other people say, hey, I can do that too. Mm-hmm. And then that gets you in that gateway. And then, getting an ID off an element in Revit. Well, okay, that's not super exciting, but at least you touch the Revit API through C# or Python, and it gets you thinking about it. And then it's not so intimidating. You save it.
Yeah.
Maybe you update your resume, say I can use the Revit API, whatever, and then it gets you in that little gateway, get you the wheels start turning. So I've been criticized, quite honestly, Jeff, in the past about making things too simple. But I
don't change. Don't change that.
I say, okay, thank you. I don't, when I do these things, especially with the one-page summaries and such, like in the book, it's not meant to cover every single case. It's really just to get you started, not to feel you intimidated, be able to kind of start it and really motivate you and encourage the AEC industry to look at this, because we've got so many very smart individuals. And another thing I say too, thank you for saying that, is someone says, I oversimplify things, and sometimes my reaction is, well, you overcomplicate things. So, if everything is overcomplicated, to cover every case, then it's scary, and I don't want this to ever be scary. So thinking about Grasshopper and Python is actually, in my opinion, a very easy thing to get started with, or Grasshopper and C#, and I'll have some examples to show you, but that's really what I want to do. So for you, I was thinking, hopefully you didn't feel intimidated. You're just finding the right example to. Yeah.
That's how all of these things come about. Even Dynamo, when I first learned it, it was, when I first learned about it, I should say, it was like, oh, this is interesting. But at the time, I just didn't think of a use. And then all of a sudden it clicked, and I was on the CM side, sort of switching to the CM side. I was like, well, I don't need to duplicate sheets anymore. Like that, that's not a use for me. But then I saw this plugin that Adam Sheether made, that was a package that Adam Sheether made that was connecting to Navisworks. It's like, boom. And then I had my reason, right? And so I'm just bringing that up because I think that's what this is going to be. It may not be right now for everyone that's watching this, but it may be 2 months from now, 2 years from now. We're like, oh, boom. And then it clicks. So anyways, let's jump into it. I don't want to go too far down that road. I just really wanted to set up a little precursor. I don't want people to get discouraged and tune out because they get scared of what could be potentially complicated. subject.
Sure, certainly.
All right, let's do it, man. Let's jump into it. I know you got some stuff to show, so I want to make sure we jump in ideas or jump into some examples, and then we can build off of that.
Okay, I do. I don't really think we have time for like a lot of live demos because we got to code from scratch. But I have some samples that I can show that can help you step into doing something like this relatively easy.
Sure.
So I should mention. Okay, so let's share my screen, or you're going to share my screen?
Yep, I got it.
Have you been sharing my screen?
They're seeing your screen. They're seeing Revit right now.
Oh wow. Okay, how about
and
that?
your face.
And my face. Okay, so I'll set it up. So here we have a wall. Here we have a wall.
Yep.
And let's say we wanted to get the wall ID off of this one. I guess there's actually 7 ways you can do it. If you wanted the wall ID, you could just go over to manage.
Use your mouse, right?
Yeah, use your mouse and what I call the graphical user interface, right? You can come over here and say ID of selection, and there you go. It's right there, right? But if you want to do it programmatically, you have 2 options now. You have Dynamo here that does have some out-of-the-box nodes that can get the ID of your element, or you also have Rhino.Inside. I'll go ahead and fire it up, where you can use Grasshopper, and there's Grasshopper out-of-the-box nodes to get the ID. Now, if you wanted to get it through making a custom component, then you could choose, do I want to use either Grasshopper or Dynamo? And then do I want to use Python or C# within those? So you may ask, why would I use Python or C# if there's an out-of-the-box node? Well, probably wouldn't be for an ID, but ultimately, as you go down your road of trying to use Dynamo and or Grasshopper for Revit, you're going to find that you're going to need to customize. And I like to use it analogous to, I've had people say, well, why would I ever customize Dynamo or Grasshopper? Well, I use it analogous to, well, have you ever built a custom family in Revit? And the answer is always yes. And I'm like, well, why don't you just use out of the box families, right? Just change your standards, right? Instead of having that, instead of have a pointy arrow on your section, just have the square arrow, right? As out of the box, right? And oh no, we would want to, okay. Well, for all those reasons that you would want to customize Revit, the same reasons apply for why you would want to eventually customize Dynamo and Grasshopper. So the topic I wanted to talk about today is kind of, which one do you choose? Do you choose Python or do you choose C#? And I'm just going to kind of show like the differences and then some pros and cons for each, and then we can kind of do it. So let's just focus on the ID. Yeah, let's focus on the ID. If anyone's not quite familiar with it yet, there is a new technology on the market called Rhino.Inside Revit. And it allows Grasshopper and Rhinoceros to talk with Revit because it actually runs inside of Revit. And so that's what I have here. You have this Revit tab right here. And now what you can do is there's a lot of components here that allows you to extract information out of the model. So one is an ID. But if you wanted to make a custom component in Grasshopper, then you could either lay down a C# component, which would be one of these, and we'll get to that in a second, or you can lay down a Python component, okay, which would be one of these. Okay, now each of them have their own plus and minuses. It kind of depends what language you want to use, but you would be using either one of these to extract an ID, and I'll show you how that works. Then I'd like to do the exact same ID conversation, but using Dynamo. And I think between the 4, we can kind of see how each one works a little differently. Okay, awesome. So let me pull up, I'm not going to be building all this from scratch. So let me pull up an example here. I have one prepped here that will show you the example of getting the ID. Okay, here we go. So let's see if I can see. Oh yeah, I can zoom in. Perfect. Okay, here we go. So I'm all about the one-page summaries, huh, Jeff?
I love them.
Yeah. So this is how it would work: is if we wanted to get an element ID using the Revit API via C# in Grasshopper. Okay, so this is Grasshopper inside Revit. Okay, so this was the component that I actually placed down, which was a C# component. All right. So what you would do in there is you would basically add these using statements just like this. If you have no idea what that means, you would just throw them in there. It's really no big deal. The next thing you would need to do is you would need to add some references in from the Revit API, which are in the form of DLLs. I won't get into that much either, but it basically tells the C# that I'm going to now work with the Revit API. If you want a little more information on that, I'll show you a little bit later. But what I wanted to really focus on was kind of the meat of the code, is that C# has to work within what we call methods. So it has to be embedded in a method, or what we call like a subroutine. So you have a little bit more setup when you do a C#. Okay. So the question is, why would you do C# and not Python? We'll get to that in just a minute. Why there would be a difference. Okay. So with C#, it's a very type-based program. It's a very type-based way of coding. So you would actually need to define each type. So for example, if we wanted to feed in this Revit element and then get the ID, you need to tell C# you have a Revit element of this type, and now you need to extract the ID. So that's basically what this first part is you're saying, okay, you're a Revit element, and then now I'm going to extract the ID, okay? So that's what C# is. It's very type-based. Now, I personally like to use C# most of the time because I can keep track of the types. The reason I like that is because in visual programming world, you have to keep track of types anyway, because you wouldn't want to feed in a number into this input port because it's expecting a Revit element. So I like to think of it as like, what's 5 plus blue, right? There is no 5 plus blue, right? That's a type mismatch. So, yeah. So if you're going to feed in a graphical element, then it's good to kind of know what you're putting in as your input, and it's easy to define it in C#. Yeah. And then with C# too, you have the ability. So that's basically it. And then you send it out. Okay. So what we did was we set it up. We basically set the type, which is this element type. We gave it a name, and then we did this .id, and the .id on that particular object then extracts the ID. And then we just send it out into this output port, which is the ID, and boom, there you go, there's the ID. Okay, that's basically how it works. All right. Now, if we wanted to do it with Python, what's the difference? Python is not type-based, and it basically tries to assume what type you want. So it actually is going to look the same in every way, kind of in the front end. You would define what the variable would be here. The only difference is that there needs to be a lot of care in terms of setting up Python to run in this environment. The reason is because Python is not a .NET language, which means you have to kind of trick it and pretend it is. And so you have to use this thing called a CLR, which basically says, okay, I'm going to load this in, and now Python, you're going to pretend you're a .NET language, which now you can access the Revit API. So there's a bit more management in kind of the references that you put in to start. And then once you're past that, then it's smooth sailing, yeah? So it's just basically feed in the element, type ID. There is no defining of the type at all. It just already assumes and kind of works it out what it is based on how it works. And then you just kind of basically say, okay, send yourself out, and then boom, there you go. So the difference really between these two is, one, there's more management in what you need to do with adding references to get Python to see the Revit API, and then C# being able to define the types when in Python you don't. And that's one reason why Python is extremely popular, is because you don't have to manage that side of it. You don't have to manage what types you have. You don't have to be very careful about how you define your variables. It's just kind of plug and chug and away you go. So I totally understand why Python is extremely popular above C#. Now the next thing is C# works in a compile situation. So typically you would have to build your C# code, compile it, and then load it in. Although what a really advantage of Grasshopper is, if you use a C# component, you don't need to do that. You can immediately run your results as you type into the window. So for example, if I were to put down a component here, and I were just to start typing in code, right within the module window, I can just click run, and it would immediately compile and run the script. Okay? And the same thing with Python, as Python is kind of inherently used to doing, and that's why a lot of folks like it, because you can type your code right in here, and then you can just hit test or run, and then it immediately runs it. Now, in a Grasshopper environment, C# and Python will run immediately. It works very different when we talk about Dynamo and how C# and Python are kind of handled.
Awesome.
So is that a good start? Is that
that's great? That's great. So
kind of a good start.
No, it is. So just to reiterate, I guess how I'm seeing what you're saying. So maybe it'll help with folks and maybe some Q&A wise. It sounds like the major difference is in the beginning, the references between Python in this example in Grasshopper and in this exact example is you're not paying more attention to, but there's more importance is on the references for Python versus the actual code, just based on the sense that it's the Python script is a little more simple once you get the references right as opposed to C#,
exactly,
which is I'm assuming in C# the references are always the same almost. Is that the case?
Yes.
And then you're changing the code. In Python, are the references different in per code or not as much?
They're not necessarily different, but they need more management. So with C# you can just load in the references and say, I can now type any code I want. In Python, you have to make sure you load in the correct references.
Got it. For what you're trying
so that
to
your
do.
Code would be able to work with it. And the whole reason is because technically Python is once removed from the Revit API, because there is a wrapper around it. And I know I'm going to get in trouble for describing it like that, but for all the Python experts, but it is once removed because Python is not inherently I keep saying this, a .NET language. So you need to actually do a little bit of trickery to kind of get it to work with the Revit API. And so you have to do and that is through the manipulation of the references.
Awesome. So now I'm curious now to see how this looks in Dynamo. so what this is a great explanation of the two doing this, producing this result, which is getting the element ID. I think regardless of what those lines of codes are, I'm curious now to see, okay, that's fine. This is Grasshopper. So now I'm Mr. Dynamo user, and I just want to understand now how Python and C#, the same exact thing, relate in Dynamo.
Okay, let's go. That's down
let's
here.
Do it.
Ready?
Let's do it.
I've got all four. Here we go. Okay. Whew. I better start with, I can start with the C# one. Okay, so now we're in Dynamo. That's red, Dynamo for Revit, right? We want to do the exact same thing. Here, I'm using a roof, but it could have been a wall, whatever, right? I also even named it the same here. So we've got, we're gonna have in Revit element as the component. Now, if you want to use C# in Dynamo, then you have to use something called zero touch. Not have to, but it's a lot easier to use something called zero touch, which is you actually need to create a separate library that will then compile a DLL, which then you would load into Dynamo. So there is this kind of one-off step for coding in C# in Dynamo. So it would look like this. You need to define a method, but then also a class, and then also a namespace. If you don't know that, it's just kind of the hierarchy of what you would do. Like the method would be the actual node itself and what it does. Then the class would wrap it. I think of it like a method is like the words in a chapter of a book. The class is like the name of the chapter of the book, and the workspace is like the name of the book. So it's kind of like this hierarchy. So then that would be compiled into a DLL. That would be the name of the book. It's technically called a library. Actually, that's I never thought about that reference. It's a library.
You just went full circle on yourself.
Yeah. Because technically a library can have many books, many namespaces in it. I never thought about that. And then you load it in.
That analogy is working real well. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And then you're able to access your node in Dynamo through this library that you created. It's not very intimidating. There's ways to set it up, and then what you would use is a separate program to create your what they call library, which typically is Visual Studio. It's free. Visual Studio community is free, and this is the code to do that. So you name your namespace, you name a class, and then you name the method. It's a public static. I don't have to go into that. It just has to do with if it's accessible and if it creates an instance. Anyway, then this is the name of it, actually, get ID. Now, as C# is the same, you have to be very careful about your types. So in this case, in the output port, we're sending out an ID. So that's basically what we do here. We say, okay, we're going to send out an ID. That's the type we're going to send out. And this is what's in the parentheses is basically what's coming into the input port. So it's in Revit element in the input port, and then we define the type again. Revit element, it's an element. Okay, so that's the input port, boom. And this is the code that generates it. You basically say, now here's the thing with Dynamo. In order to get the ID of a Revit element, Dynamo does this thing called wrapping. So you have a Revit element, say it's a wall, right? In order to display it correctly in Dynamo, Dynamo puts a Dynamo wrapper on it so that it can display correctly in Dynamo. Like it shows the little green number, like, and so on. So it has this wrapper on it. So in order to dig down into the ID, you have to what we call unwrap it. And so that's this command here, internal element. You basically unwrap the element and then pow, you get the ID. So you have to unwrap and then get the ID. Okay, and then you return the ID. It's called return when you're within a method, okay? Return. So that's how you do it. So you set up namespace, class, name of the method, which is also the name of the node, and then you basically feed in the input port, which is also what they call a parameter in the parentheses, and then you unwrap it, pull the ID, pow, send it out. That's how you would do it using C# for Dynamo.
Awesome. Let's do Python, and then I have a follow-up question, but I think you should do Python first, and we can tie it all together with the question.
Next one, let's talk about Python. It looks significantly simpler, and it is. Here's the Python script. Now, with Python and Dynamo, you do not need to separately compile it and make a library. The good thing about Dynamo and and Python is there's a Python editing window within Dynamo. So if you put down a Python node in Dynamo, you fire it up, you're allowed just to type right in there, and then you can immediately run it just like Grasshopper. So this would be the references that you would have to import, just referencing the API, blah, blah, blah. And then this is how easy it is. You basically need to unwrap what's coming in. Unfortunately, with Python, you're not allowed to change the import or the output port names, which is kind of the way it is. I know the purists would say, yes, you technically can. But I'm going to call this an intro talk, so not really. But anyway, you unwrap that element coming in, you get the ID, pow, you send it right out. So that's Python. That's why Python is very, very, very desirable within Dynamo. Another reason is a lot of packages out there, like Clockwork, not Clockwork, but a lot of the good packages out there, a lot of them are written in Python, and you can actually view the code behind a lot of those, and you'll see the underlying code. And in that way, you can copy, paste it out, change it. And that's another reason why Python is so popular within Dynamo. So I'll leave it right there because there's a more complicated example we'll go over to kind of show you the difference.
No, that's perfect.
Yeah.
I think that's
and then
perfect.
Are there any questions at this point?
So there was one question in the chat. I'll ask mine first, just to sort of reiterate everything. Tie what you said into a little bow here, which is, so in Dynamo, if you want to use C#, you have to build that DLL that in Visual Studio. So there's almost pre-work. Now, when you're building that library, you can build multiple nodes under that library once it's created. So in theory, that could be like a one-time deal depending on what you're doing. You're not opening Visual Studio every single time you're creating a custom node using C# or R.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
That's
Your
kind
library
of my question
many
was.
Books.
Yeah.
Your library has many books.
Unless for some reason you want to categorize them in a different library, then you would do it. But in theory, you're not opening Visual Studio, building this library, compiling it, then opening line every time you need to build a custom node using C#.
That's true, though. I'll mention this, that technically, let's say we wanted to change the name of this from I don't know, whatever, in Revit element to in Revit underscore element,
Mm-hmm.
right? I would have to open up Visual Studio, save it, recompile it, close Revit, close Dynamo, compile it, open Revit, open Dynamo, load it back in. So
because
way,
you've built that into library. So if you wanted to change that, it's built in by Visual Studio during that initial
right. And so the ability to what I call debug is not as snappy as Python, because Python, I would just click right in there and put in an underscore pow, run it again, and then boom, it's automatically ran again, right? So there is kind of a once level of removal from the action that's happening within Dynamo. Although there is plus and minuses, because like you said, you don't typically build very elaborate, at least I haven't, Python libraries. I mean, you can, but it's easier to manage if you do that with C# and what the developers call quote unquote zero touch.
Got it. So there was a good question from Ishan. Hey Ishan, asking about.
Oh, I knew this would happen. Oh man, I see. I know that there's exceptions to everything I say. I know some.
Yeah, there's a couple questions about it. Yeah, and John Pearson's joining the party, so I'm sure he'll have a lot to say. But
yeah,
I guess I am interested though. Is you know is there do we know if is there a performance difference between the two? We don't know that, or maybe we do. I don't know. John, a few people in the chat may have some opinions on that too. I'm sure John, you might know, but
you know, John Pearson's online, and that's great. He's here. He was the one who went from the dark side to the light side, but I don't know if I want to call it that. But John Pearson's entire rhythm package was built in Python, and then he redid it in C#. So he'd probably be the best one to know about performance. Although I have to say, I have found C# to be a little snappier when it comes to geometry creation, but that's the only time I've ever really, really compared it.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, yeah. So if John, if you want to answer in the chat,
please feel free to do that.
But I doubt. I mean, at the moment, I doubt there's anything that's not milliseconds of a difference that most humans wouldn't notice. But when it comes over time, so. Awesome.
So I think there's, so now that we've got all four up here, I think there was a question about if this is something in the book. The Python equivalent is going to be introduced in version 2.0, should be due in the summertime. The Python equivalent is not in the book at the moment, but the C# is. Now that we have all four, let's talk about kind of cross-referencing some of these, okay? One thing that you do not need to do when you use Grasshopper, is you do not need to unwrap the elements in order to dig down into their properties. What Grasshopper does is when it's fed in an element, it auto unwraps for you. So it basically, it's wrapped with a Grasshopper wrapper. You feed it in, pow, it auto unwraps, and then everything is exposed for you to pick and choose from.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great.
There's many more, but just in this example, that's one kind of blaring thing. So the unwrapping is not necessary. Now you figure, well, it's just one extra line of code. But the bigger thing is that Grasshopper also has auto wrap, which is an even bigger deal. So I'll show you that example next, but there is a lot of automation kind of built into Grasshopper to deal with the Revit database.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. So I have another thing I could share, but go ahead if you have more questions from the group.
No, I was just reading. So John did respond, and and he said generally, to his knowledge, there's not much of a runtime difference, but now he's going to test it. So.
Oh, see, you shouldn't have done that. Now John is on a tear.
He did mention that there are some updates in Visual Studio 2022 that help with the reloading of DLLs and that opening, closing, that whole repackaging of DLLs you talked about. But
okay.
We don't need to dig into that. So awesome. Yeah, let's go into another example for sure.
Yeah, you can access C# code a bit easier. I suppose you could with some of the NuGet packages, but I'm sure someone will bring that up. So there's no drawback to using. Oh, I'm sorry, I was reading one of the questions. Do you want to do that?
Yeah. It's so there's no drawback to using C# and Rhino because people have a negative approach to that. Oh, I guess he's just getting at are we? It sounds like he's kind of asking, or she. Sorry, I don't know if it's a he or she. They're kind of asking, like, is there a better of the four?
You know what? I say this every single time. I'm not one to make that judgment for you. I think that question is coming from a place of tell me which one's better, and then I'll use that one.
Mm-hmm.
My charge is to show you the pros and cons and let you decide.
Yep.
There is clearly, some people have preferences for Dynamo or Grasshopper or Python or C#. So I'm going to kind of leave it there for you to decide. My only job is just to show you the equivalence and let you make the decision.
Right.
A little dirty secret I have is I use all four. I actually use all six. It just depends on the situation.
And I'll add, as a non frequent user of these, the one thing I have learned over time is that it's nice to have this little bit of knowledge of each, because I've modified custom nodes that I'm not the one who created them, and so you're at the behest of the creator, and it may be a Python node, it may be a C# node, and so wanting to modify or use existing code, or even if you're digging through the forums and you find some existing scripts that you could modify a little bit, it is nice to at least generally get a sense of what's happening, because at least then you might be able to take something where someone did almost what you're trying to do and tweak it just a little bit to do what you're trying to do. So I think that if you're building from scratch, then you may, or you're building a library, or you're going through this, then maybe you could decide, like John did, went from from Python to C# in his entire package. You can make that decision on your own. But if you're using other information or other people's stuff, it's nice to have that little bit of knowledge in each and understand, like you're just talking about, the differences between them.
Yeah, good point. I use all of them, and here's a good case in point. Like, if someone happened to have an existing Python component in Grasshopper and it's got all the code in it, but I'm unclear on what the type is, I will kick over to C#, figure out what it is, the type, and then go back to Python and then code it in, because now I have it clear in my brain on what the type is. So I use all of them, but not necessarily to the very end. I kind of pick and choose a lot of times with the plus and minuses to get it going. Like if I'm in Dynamo and I need to do like a quick loop, like I'm iterating through a few things, I'll build a little Python component, feed it in, let it do the loop and kick it out. If I had to do that in C#, I would have to build a separate library. I'd have to compile the code and so on and so on. So there's times when I basically use all four, or all six. Yeah. Okay. So cool. We have other questions while
you're opening that, there is one more question that I'm not sure if we have a complete. This could be a developer type of answer, but it sounds like Sebastian asked. I guess they usually build their scripts with Dynamo nodes first, and then they try to go back and sort of make a Python script from it, and they notice a massive difference in speed if you run a Python or a Dynamo script of maybe 300 nodes, 20 nodes, whatever, versus one script that does the exact same thing. It may take 20 minutes to run on Dynamo, but 5 to 7 minutes to just run the Python script.
Okay, so they okay. Well, I mean, that makes sense to me. What they're saying is that if you do 10 things, if you have 10 nodes in Dynamo, they each do a different thing, versus writing one Python component that does all those 5 things in a series of code, then that would seem like that would be faster, just from a
and most likely
from a technical standpoint.
Yeah, and most likely you're being more efficient when you're writing in Python versus Dynamo, in the sense that what else is happening within each of those nodes as it steps through. There may be redundancies or different interactions or something. I can understand why that may be more heavy, right? You might actually have a more efficient chain of command, so to speak, if you're running through the code when you do it by script versus Dynamo. So I guess that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I wanted this more of a discussion than me just kind of, because I mean,
yeah.
we could be here for 12 hours.
No, I think and I think a couple people responded. I think John actually responded. Looks like he said similar things to me, where it may be more elegant when you're doing it through Python, but also the nodes, the node may be redoing previous interactions that Dynamo was working, blah blah blah. So per node, so that's kind of, I guess, yeah. So you may be redoing different things, throughout each node. So that makes sense. But honestly, that's Sebastian. That's a great point that I would put out there is doing it by visual programming first, and then trying to recreate it in the language. Sounds like a really good way to learn the language. I mean, that's like Dynamo has helped me understand coding so much, just because you're visually seeing coding happening. So I mean, that's the whole point of visual programming, right? Visual languages. So I mean, that's honestly a great. Yeah, that's a great.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sebastian. Yeah. I like it. Sure. I know companies who before they build an add-in will string out the nodes in Dynamo before they build an add-in. That way they can set the logic in their head. Mm-hmm. That is actually what made me learn C#. Was I knew Dynamo, and in order to learn C#, I see when I build a method in Dynamo, I see the component in my brain. Where's the input port? Where's the output port? And how they're named and all that. Mm-hmm. Case in point, like for example, this one is going to create levels, for example. Okay. So I'm like, well, what is the input port? Oh, it's just basically the parameter within the method itself. What's the name of the node? Oh, it's just the name of the method. Okay, what is the output of it? Oh, that's just what I return, and that's the type I describe in the method. And so every method I look at now, I make an equivalent Dynamo node in my head. Mm-hmm. And that's how I see it now. That's just the way my brain works, and it's very visual, and it really helped out a lot. So that's a good comment you got there. Okay, so let me talk just a little more complicated scenario where we can see some more of the plus and minuses, and then we'll leave it there. Although I don't want this code to seem intimidating, because really, once you put in all the references to build levels in Revit, it's that line of code right there. Mm-hmm. That is it. That creates the level. New level equals db.level.create, parenthesis, doc, comma, in value, comma. That's it. That's all it is. Okay, so a lot of this stuff that surrounds code is like setting it up, wrapping it, whatever. But really, at its core, it's just this simple line of code that does amazing stuff. So as long as you can get to that point, you're in pretty good shape. So let me point out a few more things. If we wanted to create levels, actually build a Revit element using Grasshopper and C#, let's talk about how that would be. It would be very similar, except this time now we're feeding in multiple input, not just one element, but many, right? And so basically what this does is it defines the type, it creates the new level right here, and then it sends out the new level out of the output port. The only difference is now, instead of just reading data, where you're reading the ID, you're actually creating a new element, which means you're now changing the Revit database, which puts it on a next level. So what you need to do is you need to wrap it in what they call a transaction. So have you ever done anything in Revit and then you tried to do an undo? That means there's always a transaction. You can only do something you change in Revit. Mm-hmm. So if you change something and you want to undo it, it's in there. And those are actually a document of all the transactions that happen. So if you want to build an element in Revit, or many of them, then you have to wrap it in what they call a transaction. And that's just this bit of code here. This trans, and then this commit is basically the start and the end of the transaction, and this actually creates the level. Okay. Very similar in Python, in Grasshopper, except we talked about adding the references correctly. You just need to add a bit more, because now you're using special methods to start and stop a transaction. Not super big deal.
Marcello, can you just zoom into that a little bit more? It might be a little hard for some folks to see.
Yeah, there you go. How's that?
A little more. There you go.
Yeah, that's good. So you start the transaction, and then basically you start the transaction. Pow, here's the code to do it. DB level create. You feed in the current document, which is what you have open in Revit, and then what's coming in the input port. And then pow, it creates a new level. Okay, so now let's look and see how it would shake out with Dynamo and C#. Dynamo with C#, again, you would have to make a separate library, right? A separate DLL that you would do in Visual Studio, and then, but in essence, it's very similar. You would get the current document. You would then wrap in a transaction. And then to build the level, it's right here. db.level.create, doc. Now, do you notice these are the same? db, other than this kind of extra reference, db.level.create. Do you notice how it's the same? db.level.create, because you're referencing the same exact Revit API. So the method is exactly the same. So look here, Autodesk Revit.level.create doc in, it's right there. It's right there. And for Python, it's the same thing. It's right there, db.level.create. It's the same thing. So basically what Python, C#, Dynamo, Grasshopper do is they dig in and they grab that particular method within the Revit API. So really everything else is kind of like ways to get there, right? Okay, so this is it. Now, the only other thing too is since you changed the Revit database, you got to wrap your transaction. One more thing, since it was created in Dynamo, in order to send it out, you have to wrap it back in that Dynamo wrapper for Dynamo. So you have to wrap it. It's called this 2DS type, two design script type, then send it out. If we look at Python, same thing, references, right, and so on. You have to basically wrap it, see the 2D, and then send it out. The difference here is, and one thing I like about C# in Dynamo is since we put in multiple input and a list into the input port, C# will say, okay, I have many coming in. I'm going to run this method that many times, and I'm going to push out a list of all those. Python says, whoa, are you giving me a list or one item? So you have to be careful about saying if it's a list or an item. And then so there's some extra code in here to say, no, make yourself a list, append the list, add it, and then send your stuff out. So Python has to do more list management and list creation within the code itself in order for it to send it out. So if I were to feed in just one item in this code right now, it wouldn't work. Or if I didn't add this extra create list in here and I fed in a list, it wouldn't work. Okay, so the advantage of Dynamo C#, Grasshopper C#, Grasshopper Python is you don't need to worry about if a list or a single item is coming in. But you do need to do that with Python for Dynamo. So one more thing before we close is I made this handy little cheat sheet, and it could be more extensive than this, but I thought, okay, if I make a little handy little cheat sheet, let's kind of think about the pros and cons of Python and C# and Dynamo and Grasshopper, right? And so here's kind of a summary of everything we talked about. And I know there's more, but this is what I came up with, okay? So this is Dynamo Python, Dynamo C#, Grasshopper Python, Grasshopper C#. So can you unwrap Dynamo? You have to do it manually. C#, right? Python and C# and Grasshopper does it automatically. Wrap, Grasshopper does it automatically. Python and Dynamo, you have to do it. It does it automatically. In Dynamo, you have to do it manually. Manage and check lists. Actually, this is not right. This is automatic. Sorry, I got that wrong. So in checking and managing lists, you have to do it manually in Python, but for Dynamo C#, Grasshopper Python, and C# Python, it does it automatically for you. Running instantly, we talked about that, where you can just run the code and it doesn't need to compile. Python, it does it automatically. Both Python and C# Grasshopper, but C# Dynamo, you need time to compile it in a separate to create a library. And then the type management, we talked about that. The type management for Python is not required. You have to say what it is, like you're a number or you're a Revit element. You don't need to do that for Python either case, but you got to do it for C#. Whew. How's that sound?
That was fantastic.
Okay.
So, no, that was awesome. I was laughing because John also mentioned in the chat just now that he said, I gotta say, working with lists is one of the reasons I swapped to C#.
Oh, did you hear that?
The truth is out. He's sweet. So I guess one of the things that I'm sort of popped in my mind, especially as you went through that list and these two examples, which again, thank you so much. This was honestly eye-opening to sort of see and start connecting all these dots. I'm almost seeing, and I'm curious maybe your thoughts on this. It's almost like we're getting to the point where there's enough functionality in Rhino.Inside that do you see, for example, Grasshopper being equivalent to Dynamo in the sense that that could be a path someone takes instead of using Dynamo at all for automating typical stuff that we think of Dynamo for. In theory, we could be using Rhino.Inside with Grasshopper because we like that certain aspects of that. So do you see any inherent limitations of the fact that it's Rhino.Inside and it's not necessarily Grasshopper, or it's not built, it's calling the Revit API, but it's a different, what are the, is there any reasons, if I wanted to go on right now and let's say I wanted to do something like I always use an example for Dynamo, which is duplicate views and rename them for part plans or something, right? That's you set up scopes, scope boxes, and you click a button, and all the levels get duplicated into views for part plans at assigned by very, very typical sort of thought of automation in Dynamo. That in theory you could just build that in Grasshopper as well at this point in time, right?
You certainly could. And while you were talking, is my screen still being shared?
It is. Yep.
I updated this table. So basically, it's kind of like at this point in time, like if you took a snapshot now, are you saying would Grasshopper in Revit place Dynamo for Revit? The answer is no way.
That's where I was
Dynamo
going with it.
and the relationship with Revit has been around since 2013. Grasshopper for Revit, or Grasshopper inside Revit, has only been around a few years, so it needs time to mature. So for example, all the annotation functionality that you would need to do in Revit is I'm going to say great in Dynamo right here. It is I'm going to say lacking in Grasshopper. Okay. Now the interoperability between Revit and Rhino, I'm going to say is lacking in Dynamo, and great in I'm sorry, did I miss that? Yeah, great in Grasshopper. So what I'm trying to say is it's kind of like the right tool for the right job. So this in my opinion is just the projection of how things will move, at least in the near future. Is if you're trying to get geometry from Rhinoceros into Revit, then Grasshopper is the great tool to use to do that, because there's components in there to do that. And then if you want to modify or tweak something, that's when you can introduce C# and Python of Grasshopper. If you want to put dimensions, fine dimensions, hatch patterns, create multiple sheets and center the views, then Dynamo would be the way to go, because it is great to do that, and Grasshopper is lacking. So what I do, and this is what the Parametric Monkey is teaching actually probably right now at Built A and Z, is the fact that you can run both at the same time. You can have Dynamo and Grasshopper up at the same time, touching your Revit project, and then you just kind of use what you want. And my little dirty secret is I usually run Dynamo and Grasshopper at the same time on my project, and then I just kind of pick and choose which one to use. Awesome. So I'm going to save this. This would be a good summary for it. But yeah, does that help, Jeff?
That's perfect. That's exactly what I was getting at, was sort of, because as you initially introduced Rhino.Inside with Grasshopper, whatever it was now, I don't even know, a year ago. Maybe it feels, the last 2 years feel all blurred, right? And then Asan came on and talked about Rhino.Inside, and sort of the idea there was really, and I think he did a great job of it, just showing some real world examples of how this could work, the interoperability, right? It's really just look at the walls here and it's here, and they exist in both places, and we're almost handshake, right? We can work together almost between the two,
right?
So when you were showing this now, I have a lot of thoughts of like, well, at some point in time, is there enough functionality in Rhino.Inside with Grasshopper that Dynamo doesn't even need to exist, or they're essentially parallel programs?
Let's put it this way. You saw my screen shared, and I probably should do this too. Yep. I can see it as two things. We have one circle is Dynamo and one circle is Grasshopper. Okay, and then one does really well with geometry, and one does really well with annotation and other things. Okay, this being Dynamo and this being Grasshopper. There is, of course, this overlap, which would be things that they both do, and that's what the whole book is about, like getting and setting parameters, reading data and extracting geometry, and and so on and so on and so on. So there's this big overlap. So I see over time, this gap is just going to get bigger and bigger and big. Not gap. This overlap is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't think it'll ever completely be equivalent, but I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger as Rhinoceros and Grasshopper Rhinoceros Rhino.Inside Revit gets more mature. It's going to start adding more and more of these components that do what Dynamo does. But I don't really ever think it's going to completely take it over.
At some point, it's going to be like, I don't want to touch that part of the Revit database, right? It's like, just
right.
There's corners of Revit Dynamo that no one wants to touch, right?
Right, and Dynamo is designed for that. Dynamo is really designed to get in there and grab the Revit database and just shake it and say, give me everything you have. And Grasshopper's charge is more in the context of interoperability, bringing things in, then manipulating it, and then it kind of passing it to production. Awesome. So I think that's probably going to be the philosophy moving forward. That's just in my humble opinion.
It sounds like a well-educated opinion, so we'll go with that for now. We'll see how it plays out over time, right?
Okay.
Oh man, no, this is great. I appreciate it, man. I think it's a perfect place to wrap it up. And I will make sure all of the links to any of the information that we talked about today is set up in the description below, as well as on the blog at bimafterdark.com. And I'm sure and I think a couple people did ask about these specific reference sheets that you were showing today. I think what you said is those will be in version 2 or version 2 of the book. So keep an eye out for that, and I'll make sure. But
you know what, Jeff? You know what I'll do just for all the listeners? I will share the one we were talking about, which is the ID. I'll share this image so that everyone could start to kind of absorb the differences, because we mostly, and then that way.
Perfect.
This is a good little template to.
Awesome.
To
great.
remember us by.
Awesome, man. No, I appreciate it.
And this one, right? You want this one too, I think. I think between that and this.
Yeah, I think you should. I think you should save that for sure. Yep. I think we should save that as a good little wrap up of everything.
You got it.
Awesome.
I'll make sure. For you, Jeff.
You got it, man. Thanks a lot for coming on again, Marcello. I'll make sure to put information to Simply Complex, which is your blog. I'll put information to where you can reach out to Marcello on Twitter as well. Thanks again for coming on. Any final words before you wrap up?
No, just I'm excited. I think things are starting to open up. So I wish everyone good health and keep plugging along. Good luck if you have any questions.
Agree. Hopefully we'll see everyone in person soon, right?
Yeah, very good. And thank you for having me on, Jeff. Thank you, everybody.
Of course, always, man, always. And thank you guys for joining us again. As usual, it's been a great episode. Appreciate it. And with that, I bid you all adieu.